Um, Sawadee I'm Arjun. I'm the co-founder and project lead of Connext. I wish I knew more Thai. Unfortunately, I think next time I'll actually have to learn Thai so that I can give my presentation in Thai for everyone. In this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about Connext. I know some of you already know who we are. You know a little bit about what we do. Oh, thank you. But I want to give like a high-level overview of what Connext is about, where we came from and where we're going, and why we think what we're doing is important. So it's no secret now that we're living in this multi-chain world. This brings a lot of challenges, right? Everybody is interacting with applications that are running on Ethereum, Polygon, Avalanche, BSC, FTX. There's even more chains going live now. This isn't even the chains that we support. This is just a few that I could fit on here before I got tired of putting logos on this slide. And I think the user experience of interacting with applications in this world is just really terrible. So if you've ever used like Aave on any of these chains and had to deal with the whole process of I have funds on one chain and I want to go use Aave on another chain, you have to go and select which chain you want to interact with. And then on top of that, you actually have no real way to migrate positions or anything like that. So if you want to see, for example, what chain on Aave you're going to get the best rate, you have to go and click each and every single one of these chains, which because everything takes a long time to load in the decentralized world, pulling data from these chains can also take a long time. Doing this will actually just take you several minutes. And you want to do this every single time you trade or every single time you use any application. It's just extremely frustrating. And if you want to actually send money across chains, if you want to take funds that you have in Aave on one chain and then bring them to the same application on another chain, you actually have to leave Aave completely. And this is even worse. If you, for example, are migrating your positions between Polygon and Arbitrum, and you go through Connext, you actually have to leave, go to the Connext Bridge UI, and then go back to the Aave UI to be able to use it again. I don't know how many people here have like built applications or anything like that, but generally speaking, when you build an application and you're in your application having to send your users somewhere else, most of those users are not coming back because they don't care. And the reality is, for people who are in this room and for people who are interested in the space and care about this space, they're willing to put up with this for now. But anybody else who is outside of this room, anyone who you're bringing into crypto for the first time, doesn't understand this. They don't understand what a chain is. They don't understand why you have multiple chains in the first place. So instead of this multi-chain user experience, what we need is a cross-chain user experience. You need people to be able to just interact with the application, which in this case is Aave, and you need Aave to be able to handle the whole process of handling multiple chains in the background. So have Aave do the job of connecting to different liquidity pools on each chain rather than having you do that job. The bottom line is users shouldn't really have to know what chain they're on. Especially as we move towards more and more chains, it's going to become extremely confusing for users to think, okay, am I on Arbitrum or Optimism? And then when Arbitrum launches many chains, as they're doing right now, which version of Arbitrum am I on? And even for people within the space, that's going to become extremely, extremely problematic very quickly. And this is also true for developers, right? If you're a new developer building this space, you don't want to have to think about, okay, I am interacting with applications on this chain, and that means I can only work, I'm building an application on Ethereum, that means I can only work with other applications that are running on Ethereum. You want to be able to call a contract or call another application, interact with another dApp that you're building from whichever chain you're on. And for those of you that are developers, you actually want to be able to do more than that. You want to be able to continue interacting with your existing application on the first chain as well afterwards. It's not like you send some data and some funds out to another chain and then you never hear from it again. You want to be able to get return data. You want to know that something actually happened. And in many cases, you want to take that data and then use it to continue doing things. And this is where we get to something that's really interesting. Because when you start interacting with chains in this way, when you start building an experience where the chain itself doesn't really matter as much, where building, as a builder, you don't really need to care about one isolated ecosystem that you're in, but you can instead interact with all of these chains all together. You get this really interesting concept of an internet of blockchains. There's a lot of people that have talked about this before. This is something that I think the Cosmos ecosystem, this is an idea that they have beaten to death because they've been talking about it since like 2014. And to be honest, I think Cosmos is awesome because they were just really early to this. They realized very quickly that we were going to have to move to this kind of world eventually. And when we did that, we would have to figure out this problem of how do you communicate between blockchains. Most importantly, when you're building this internet of blockchains, right, this is infrastructure that is now a new kind of internet. This is infrastructure that needs to last, and it needs to exist for as long as the internet itself does. Because if you're interacting with applications that are running on these chains, and you're, for example, Uniswap, and Uniswap continues to exist, but the links between all of the chains that Uniswap runs on keep breaking all the time, that's not ever going to work for anyone. And that's not going to stay working for a long period of time. So this is a core part of like what we believe in. We think that we need to work together to build this internet of blockchains, and that internet of blockchains needs to be able to last long enough for people to rely on it as public infrastructure, as infrastructure that is as commonplace eventually one day as the internet is today, right? Being able to utilize this infrastructure, being able to utilize this cross-chain world without ever having to think about it. So why is this difficult? There's a lot of different bridging and interop projects out there. There's different levels. There's things like Hop, for instance, which just does like liquidity transfers between chains. There's things like Axelar and Layer 0 that move towards more generalized messaging, which really is closer to what we were talking about, where you can interact with these different chains really, really easily and effectively. But the process of actually building this is quite difficult. And I don't think there are any solutions out there that have actually figured out the perfect way to build a cross-chain communication system. And why is that? I think the reason is that whenever you're working with distributed systems, whenever you're working with blockchains, there are always trade-offs. There's a trade-off space around scalability that everybody knows is the blockchain scalability trilemma now. And then there's also this trade-off space around bridging and interoperability. And the trade-off space that we see is that you have to really only choose 2 out of these 3 properties in most cases. Any bridge you build and then eventually any kind of like cross-chain communication system you build will have to be only 2 of generalizable, trustless, or extensible. So what do these things mean? Generalizability is the ability to send any message across chains, right? This is kind of like where we're going. This is what Axelar has been talking about a lot. This is what Layer 0 has been talking about a lot. Extensibility is the ability to take your system and deploy it to many, many chains quickly. So, making sure that the project that you build works on every single chain that's out there, and you don't have to do custom integrations for every single chain you want to support. And lastly, trust minimization is, of course, the ability to retain the core security properties of the blockchain, right? You can do all, you can have generalizability and extensibility if you just use Coinbase. You can have a single server give the best possible user experience, but that kind of defeats the purpose, right? Why bother using blockchains in the first place if you're going to start introducing that assumption? I think the problem is that no matter what kind of system you build, you always end up having to trade off one of these things. So in the case of things like Axelar and Layer 0, you have a generalizable and extensible system, but it uses a third-party set of validators. It's basically like its own blockchain. So now, if you are using a blockchain like Ethereum that has better security, that has better economics because there are more nodes operating that blockchain, the security of your system, even though you want to build on top of Ethereum, is still always going to be the security of Axelar. And while Axelar is a fantastic project, I think that is fundamentally a new assumption. It's a new assumption for developers, and most developers don't want to have to think about those assumptions. They just want to be able to build a project. One of the things that makes things a little bit more interesting is that in the last, I would say 5 to 6 months, we've been working with a project called Nomad that has pioneered this concept of optimistic bridges. There are still trade-offs with this, but optimistic bridges actually allow you to get all of these different properties. And the way that they do this is that you send data across chains, and instead of having some blockchain that sits in between, instead of having some server that verifies things, instead of having a multi-sig or anything like that, you actually just accept that data might be wrong. And you basically say that, okay, for a period of 30 minutes, I'm going to wait and see if anyone in the world is willing to contest that this is correct. This is interesting because this is a system that's really simple. It's easy to put onto any kind of blockchain. It really just doesn't require any dependencies. So you can use it the same way in the Cosmos ecosystem as you can use it in Ethereum. And most importantly, it is trustless, right? The security of a system where anyone can come and dispute it is the same kind of model as a roll-up, as the layer 2 solutions that people have been working on building in Ethereum for a very long time. But of course, as I mentioned, there is a trade-off. And this is the problem, that there are always trade-offs, right? The trade-off in the case of an optimistic bridge is that you're now adding latency. Any message that you send across chains, any application that you build, any funds that you transfer are now going to take 30 minutes instead of 2 minutes. This is something that I don't think we can solve directly. The best approach that we have to solve, trade-off spaces like this is to try to stack different protocols together to basically have something called modularity. With modularity, you can combine the benefits of different protocols like Nomad, which uses optimistic bridging, and Connext, which uses other mechanisms to be able to do transfers of liquidity and some kinds of data very, very quickly, to come up with a solution that actually gives you the best options, that gives you the best security while retaining the properties that you want. And this is really what we get to. This is what we're trying to build, is this idea of cross-chain composability without needing multi-sigs, without needing validators, without needing another chain. And I think this is an incredibly powerful concept that not many people have begun to explore that eventually will be driving the way that we think about chain-to-chain communication. So I'm taking a little bit of a step back here to talk a little bit about Connext because I think most people don't know much about us. We're pretty quietly building for a very long time. Actually, we started in 2017. When we were founded, our goal was always, we believe in blockchains and we want to find a way to bring them to the broader consumer public. And that's really two problems. The first is scalability. How do you scale these blockchains so that people are not paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars in gas, like you are currently on Ethereum? And then also user experience, right? You can't build these systems in a way where they're so impossible to use. You can come up with really, really complex solutions, but if they're impossible to use, then what's the point? In 2018, once we started with three founders kind of working on this, researching in the space, learning about the trade-offs of blockchains and some of the deep technical pieces behind them. And in 2018, we actually received a grant from the Ethereum Foundation to start researching this full time. We ended up building the first ever Ethereum L2. We're 3 years early. It was pretty cool. But at the time, we had no idea what to do. Nobody really knew what to do. It was a completely open space. But I think over the course of pretty much 2 years afterwards, and working with a lot of the other L2 research teams, the space around understanding blockchain scalability has jumped forward massively to the point where we now are in this multi-chain world today. And people understand, okay, yeah, you can scale blockchains by moving to this many chain-like environment. About a year ago, actually almost 2 years ago now, sorry, we ended up realizing that there was going to be this problem when you move to this multi-chain world, which is how do you actually give users a good experience, right? How do you deal with the problems that we talked about earlier in the slide deck? And we created the first ever prototype to be able to transfer funds between rollups. At the time, we had no idea that this was going to be interesting to anybody. We just kind of built it. And it kind of went viral. People really were like, wait, this is going to be a problem. We never realized this was going to be a problem, but it is. And so last year when we launched the first version of the Connext bridge, which we actually didn't even call a bridge, it was called Explanate because we were partnering with another team and we needed a name for it. We had no idea what to call it. When we launched that actually ended up going kind of viral. We went from not having any users at all to having $40 million in weekly volume in the space of 2 months. It was insane. It was honestly the most stressful thing I've ever experienced. I think I'm actually aged 10 years because of it. And in addition to that, we also ended up raising. So I think a lot of VCs, a lot of folks that we started talking to, we realized that this was a really, really big problem that would actually require a significant amount of capital and also would require many, many years of work to solve. Where we are right now. So a few weeks ago, we announced Amrock, which is our latest upgrade of the network. Amrock goes from doing this early thing that we did, which was liquidity transfers across chains with the bridge UI and things like that, to more complex, more expressive composability between blockchains. the ability to build an application that can run on many chains all at the same time. Where is that now? So we'll be announcing our public testnet of Amarok tomorrow, big alpha leak. Not really, but kind of. Once that happens, we are already working with like a very large number of projects that are building on top of it, and many of whom are kind of blue chips that we'll be announcing soon. And then we'll be kicking off audits in about 2 weeks. Once that happens, it's pretty much, we're kind of at the mercy of auditors, so we don't know exactly what the timeline is to get this live. But we expect that it should be mid to late June. And I think that this is where Connext not only becomes a very, very interesting project to build on top of and to think about, but also this whole ecosystem becomes a lot closer together because you're creating, this will be the first instance that you'll have like fully trustless composability across blockchains, ever. So what can you build with this? And what will people build with this? There's so many interesting use cases. We're only just starting to categorize them and learn about them. Some of the things that really interest us are cross-chain governance. So everybody, you know, there are DAOs on most of the DAOs now operate on Ethereum currently, but they need to interact with protocols that are running on many chains all at once. So, you know, what happens if Uniswap needs to update their fee tiers on Polygon from Arbitrum? What happens if, you know, you have a governance system that needs to do liquidity mining on many chains all at the same time? What about V-token governance, right? Imagine if you could do like curve style, convex style V-token, basically locking, vote escrowing your tokens from any chain rather than simply on Ethereum itself. The same kinds of concepts also extend to DeFi. So, you know, imagine building cross-chain dexes. Imagine building cross-chain lending aggregators. The ability to use Aave on all chains all at once and get the best price regardless of what chain you're on. Having to think about, oh, I can go over here because there's better yield is terrible. So you could just build yield optimizers that take care of that for you. So imagine Yearn, but it gives you the best yield on every chain altogether all at once. And lastly, NFTs. It's obviously a very, very interesting space that's really blowing up right now. And there's some really cool things you can do around NFT bridging. You can do things around like cross-chain marketplaces for NFTs, not having to be isolated into one chain, for instance. I know, for example, Polygon is really struggling with this, where they have a really, really cheap chain that is perfect for marketplaces, but it's really difficult to get people to deploy Polygon NFTs because they just haven't built that ecosystem yet. And then there's more really interesting and cool things like metaverse to metaverse interoperability. Imagine if you could take your items from Decentraland and use them in Sandbox. Imagine if you could take your Axie Infinity like NFTs and then utilize them in other systems. I think there's a lot of really, really amazing composability stuff that happens there. How can you get involved? One big thing for us is that we are this very like aggressively community-driven project. We really, really want to make sure that as much as possible that can happen in our ecosystem happens driven primarily by people that are in the community rather than by us as a core team. Partly this is because there's only 20 of us and we don't have enough time to really do everything. And partly just because I think it's much more sustainable. I guess it's almost a month ago now, we announced the Connext token. The Connext token is a staking and governance token that will be used to secure the new Amarok upgrade. We won't go live with staking right away, we'll go live with a whitelist, but that's something that will follow pretty quickly afterwards. And I think the Connext token is also our mechanism to be able to start decentralizing to this community ownership as fast as possible. And the way that we plan to do that is what we're calling the contributor program. I know that most people here are probably aware of this at this point because you know, you are part of Contribution DAO and Contribution DAO is involved with this in a very, very significant way. But I really like this program because I think that it's first of all, it was actually created by our community directly. We weren't even, the idea came from a community member and it's operated entirely by the community. And it's just a really great example of the kinds of things that you can build if you allow your community to do it for you instead of you doing it yourself. And so the contribution program is a really, really great way to be involved, even regardless of what your skill set is, right? If you're a community builder, you can become a moderator or ambassador. If you are a content creator, you can actually help build content for Connext. If you're a developer, you can build applications on top of us. And if you don't know yet, that's totally okay too. Like, we still want to work with everybody. Oh. Should have probably switched to this earlier, but there you go. It's in writing. I think overall, we're really, really excited by being able to work with you guys as a DAO, and also with this like broader ecosystem of developers and people like that, because we think that that's really how this technology moves forward, right? If we want to be here for 100 years, I am definitely not going to be here for 100 years. I will probably die at some point, hopefully, I guess. And if that happens, who takes this project forward? It's going to be the community. So if you're interested in being involved, check out contribute.connext.network if you haven't already. Sign up for the program. You can also learn more about us on our Twitter or by joining our Discord. I would definitely recommend doing that because our community is awesome. And lastly, I just want to say thank you to everybody for having me here. Thank you to like JD and everybody that helped organize this trip. It's been a fantastic experience. I'm super, super lucky to be able to actually be here with all of you. And super grateful to have you be involved. Yeah, thank you.